So I just took a practice MCAT and I scored a 504. Now this isn't really too bad considering that this was my first practice exam and I only self-studied for 1 week. However, I'm aiming for schools like Harvard and they require scores at least 522 and above. That is quite a big jump. So let's look at how we can make this score better and the steps to take from here. So this was my test portal where I took the practice MCAT test given by the AAMC. So this was the MCAT official prep free sample test unscored. And so in this, I got 157 out of 230 with a total time spent of 3 hours, 8 minutes. Now you might ask, well, the MCAT is 7 hours long, so why did you take the exam in only 3 hours? And the answer to that was a lot of questions I just guessed and moved on. That being said, let's look at these 4 different parts of the MCAT. The first part is the chemical and physical foundations of the biological systems. In this, I got a 38 out of 59. My overall take on this part was I was doing pretty well. I understood about 75% of the questions, but there were a lot of questions on amino acids or simply stuff that I didn't memorize. So with that being said, there was a lot of lost points in that, and there was also a lot of biochem material I just simply haven't seen, so it was understandable that I simply got it wrong. On the other hand, though, for critical analysis and reasoning skills, the cars section, this went brilliantly. I scored a 51 out of 53, which is a pretty good score, essentially 100% when we calculate the final MCAT scores, which is 132 per section. I'll show you the exact score calculator afterwards, but this was pretty good. I felt really confident with this, considering it was pretty similar to the SAT. Now my SAT score was pretty high. It was a 1560 out of 1600, so the cards portion was pretty easy for me. Moving on into biological and biochemical foundations of living systems, this was a complete train wreck. I guessed on pretty much 90% of the questions, and honestly, if I got 2 less wrong on this, or if I got even more mistakes, my score would be basically the lowest score you can get on this section. So not really proud of this part, but it was a pretty hard section, and I just didn't understand any of it. Moving into psychological, social, and biological foundations, this part was okay, not too bad, much better, considering a lot of it was common sense. However, there were some termage, such as operant conditioning and B.F. Skinner, and names like this. And although I'm taking psych, I just didn't remember any of these concepts. So it became really confusing and really problematic in that sense. So when it came to conceptual questions like that, I definitely got them wrong. However, for the critical analysis questions in this, and there were quite a few critical analysis questions, I got those right and it was pretty clear in my overall score. So I took all of these scores and I put it into this website called International Medical Aid, and I essentially got my score of 504. 125 out of 132 for the Chem and Phys section, 132 out of 132 for cars, 120 out of 132 for the biochem, and 127 out of 132 for the psych and social sciences portion. And this was pretty decent considering it was my first exam, but we can't let my score stay as a 504, so let's get into how am I going to improve from here and what steps I'm going to take. So overall, the steps I'm thinking is 2 things. The first part is to gain exposure to the MCAT material. Looking back in this test, there was a lot of questions, for example, I just guessed on. As you can see here, 8 seconds, 3 seconds, 14 seconds, 8 seconds. This is just basic guesswork. I looked at the question, I was like, I don't understand any of the terms here, and I moved on. And the issue with that is, well, I can't be doing that on the actual test. So I need some exposure and to understand these concepts and review them to sort of see where I am. And so to do that, I need something that would give me content videos of every single topic. The second thing I need to do is find a MCAT grinding session. And this grinding session is going to sort of give me personalized feedback as to where I can improve. Since the MCAT is such an important test for med schools, and med schools are a pretty important job for a doctor, it's important I do well on this test. So the amount of money here that's being spent doesn't really matter. That being said, let's look at some of the options that I'm thinking about. So I went up and searched up stuff, And I essentially got this list of 5. And this was the first link. It pretty much aligned with stuff I knew from Reddit, Premed stalking, and my overall conception of the MCAT prep services. So there's Blueprint, Kaplan, and Princeton Review, and this Magoosh website. I ignored this Prep 101 because it didn't really seem that useful, considering I looked at their UI, it wasn't really something I wanted to do with, so I ignored this one. Moving forward, I looked at Kaplan first because I've heard really good things about it, and I sort of wanted them to have something that would give me all the information. However, for $1,600, it just felt like a lower priced version of one of these premium courses. So I quickly moved away from that, saving this one for the second step, which is the MCAT grinding session. Moving further, I looked at Princeton Review. Now, Princeton Review was pretty good considering the pricing. This was definitely cheaper than Kaplan. However, in my experience, that Princeton Review was not something that I was effectively had good affinity with. I struggled with Princeton Review when it came to the SAT. It only boosted my score from about 1350 to 1500. However, to reach that last 1600 or reach that 1560, which I ended up with, Princeton Review was very little help in that case. In that sense, it was the books that mainly helped in that one. So Princeton Review has good books, but it didn't really help in this case. So I kind of ignored Princeton Review from this list. And so it's probably going to be Kaplan for the second part. I went for Magoosh, and Magoosh had really effective prices, and it has a good amount of content video for only $400. This would be pretty good for the first 2 months, which I plan on sort of gaining this exposure. So I was pretty happy with this, but I also wanted a sort of double check since the exposure part is probably the most important part when it comes to studying for the MCAT. So I got 2 different solutions. One was Khan Academy, and the other was a Reddit recommended YouTube channel called Med School Coach MCAT Prep. So for this Khan Academy thing, to be honest, I don't like Khan Academy. And the answer for that is really simple. When it came to prepping for the SAT, Khan Academy was absolutely useless to me. It gave terrible practice tests, and these sort of questions, they're nothing like what's on the MCAT. On the MCAT, you get a passage and you get a question, and oftentimes the passage is used to answer that question. Here you get questions like this is just rote memorization, doesn't really help. I don't really like this. And to be honest, that's why I'm not going to use Khan Academy. However, this Med School MCAT Prep, I watched a couple of videos as you can see here, and it seemed pretty good. It just lacked the depth that I wanted. It just gave a basic introduction, and that's sort of making me happy, but it's sort of lacking in a way. So I'm deciding to keep this as a sort of general overview, maybe in the car instead of taking notes on this, maybe in the car when I'm watching something or like listening to music, I just put this on in the background and sort of get the concepts. However, past that, it doesn't really seem that useful, so Magoosh is probably a good step for the first step. So for the second step then, it's probably going to be Kaplan. I'm probably thinking about one of these 2 courses. The online bootcamp being 5 weeks seems a bit sketchy considering that doing all your MCAT prep in 5 weeks is not ideal. There's a reason people suggest around 6 months, and I'm taking 8. So I'm definitely considering between these 2 courses right here. Right here we have a $33.99 price, $515 guaranteed. And we have this premium tutoring, which is $37.40, and that's also a $515 guarantee. For a difference at only $200, this about provides private tutoring around $400. So around how much private tutoring does it give? It gives about 40 hours of private tutoring. And in this case, it gives about 0 hours of private tutoring. So the decision is probably going to be this one because I definitely want some private tutoring in there. So that would be about $37.40. Adding in the Magoosh price, that's about $400. So approximately my whole MCAT journey is going to cost $4,200, which just sounds expensive, but for the amount of money you get as a doctor and in the future, this price is relatively a small sacrifice. So that's my overall thinking about the MCAT. To recap, I looked at the MCAT, I got a 504. I don't want a 504, I want at least a 522. In order to do that, I looked at exactly what I'm messing up, and I realized that I simply don't have exposure to the material. To get exposure, I need content videos. To get content videos, I found two solutions. One is Magoosh and one is Med School Coach MCAT Prep. And one was recommended from online research and the other was recommended by Reddit. And then after I get that initial content overview, then after like 2 months, which the timeline looks around February, I will move into the Kaplan course and get a private one-on-one MCAT tutor for Kaplan, and that's going to cost around $3,700. That's the direction I'll move into August, where I take my first MCAT test. So that's the overall goal. That's my direction. Hope you all are doing well. Make sure you guys have a plan going into the MCAT. So overall, take care. Have a nice day. That's my MCAT video.